February 1943. Stalingrad has fallen. 300,000 German soldiers, dead, wounded, or marching into captivity. The southern front of the Wehrmacht is a wound without a tourniquet. And the Soviets are not stopping. They are pushing west with a momentum that feels historical, inevitable, final. The Stavka believes the war in the east has turned a corner from which there is no return. What remains is pursuit. What remains is the chase. Kharkov, the fourth largest city in the Soviet Union, sits directly in the path. Its fall appears to be a matter of days, perhaps hours. On February 16th, it falls without a fight. No last stand, no desperate defense. The city simply changes hands as German forces pull back. From Moscow, from London, from Washington, the interpretation is uniform. The Wehrmacht in the south is collapsing. The question is no longer whether it will break. The question is how far the break will run. That is the reasonable conclusion. It is also wrong. Because there is a moment in every military collapse when the real question shifts. It is no longer about whether the line can hold. It is about who controls the collapse, who steers it, who shapes it, who turns it into something that looks like catastrophe from the outside, but functions like a plan from within. 3 SS Panzer divisions, freshly equipped, are moving into position south of the city. And a field marshal named Erich von Manstein is watching the Soviet advance with something that is not panic. He is watching it the way a man watches a clock. The Stavka has not accounted for this. Not yet. To understand what Manstein chose to do, you must first understand what he was told to do. Berlin's response to the crisis was structural, reflexive, and predictable. Hitler issued the unconditional hold order. Hold where you stand, no retreats, no surrender of ground. Every position is to be defended to the last man. This was not an irrational doctrine in all cases. At Moscow in December 1941, the hold order had arguably prevented a rout. It had become institutional memory, the lesson that withdrawal invites disintegration. But it was a lesson applied to a situation where it did not fit. Because the front that was supposed to be held no longer existed. You cannot hold what is not there. A standard German infantry division on paper carried 15,000 men. By February 1943, most divisions on the southern sector operated at less than 50% of that number. A panzer division that should have fielded 100 tanks often moved with 30 or 40. The gap between authorized strength and actual strength was not a footnote. It was the defining characteristic of the Heeresgruppe Don. Manstein understood this arithmetic with precision. He understood that the hold order, applied literally, would not produce a stable front. It would produce encirclement. It would produce another Stalingrad, smaller in scale but identical in geometry. So he held, but not where Hitler demanded. He held in his analysis, in the calculation, in a single question that reorganized every decision that followed. What does the enemy need in order to win? And how do I use those needs against him? That question required something counterintuitive. It required letting the enemy advance. It required giving him exactly what he wanted. It required letting Kharkov fall. While the front dissolved, something else was arriving. The 2nd SS Panzer Corps. Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, das Reich, Totenkopf, had spent the winter of 1942–43 in France and Germany, not resting, refitting, completely. This distinction matters. On the Eastern Front, the distance between authorized strength and actual strength was the central fact of every operation. Divisions fought at fractions of their paper establishment. Commanders planned around absence. The SS Panzer Corps was the exception. It had received not just replacement personnel, but a full re-equipment with the most current material available. The Leibstandarte completed its reorganization at an actual strength that came closer to its authorized establishment than any comparable army division on the Eastern Front. This was not coincidence. It was the result of a systematic resource allocation that favored the Waffen-SS over regular army formations. The equipment itself represented a qualitative shift. The Panzer IV Ausführung G mounted the long 7.5-centimeter gun, a weapon capable of reliably penetrating the T-34 at combat ranges of 800 to 1,000 meters. This single upgrade reversed the tactical asymmetry that had defined armored combat in 1941 when German tank crews discovered their guns could not kill the enemy's primary tank. And then there was the Tiger. Schwere Panzerabteilung 503 brought the Tiger I into the equation. Its 8.8-centimeter gun penetrated every Soviet tank at distances where no Soviet weapon could penetrate it in return. Soviet commanders who identified a Tiger on the battlefield faced decisions their training had no satisfactory answer for. Close to point-blank range and risk destruction on approach, or engage at distance and watch rounds deflect. 3 divisions, full strength, modern armor, moving south of Kharkov while the Stavka's attention pointed west. The variable no one in Moscow had calculated. The Stavka's error was not stupidity. It was pattern recognition applied one step too far. Stalingrad had proven the Wehrmacht could be defeated. That was a historical finding, valid, documented, real. But from that historical finding, the Soviet command structure made a leap. It converted a conclusion about what had happened into a directive about what would happen next. The Wehrmacht was retreating, therefore the Wehrmacht was broken. Therefore pursuit was the correct operational response. Therefore, resources should flow forward, into the advance, deeper into the gap. Operations Star and Gallop drove Soviet forces westward through January and February. The 6th Soviet Army and the 1st Guards Army pushed toward the Dnieper crossings. Each day brought new ground. Each report confirmed the thesis. But each kilometer gained also produced a cost that did not appear in the victory dispatches. Every kilometer extended supply lines. Every advance thinned the forces across a wider front. Every captured town required fuel that was already running short. The gaps between divisions widened into spaces large enough for an armored corps to pass through. A pursuing army is an army that believes it is winning, and an army that believes it is winning abandons the discipline of defense. It does not secure its flanks. It does not rotate reserves. It does not plan for retreat, because retreat does not exist in its conceptual framework. The Soviets read Manstein's withdrawal as weakness. That reading was logical. It was consistent with the evidence available. It was supported by the operational pattern of the previous 3 months. It was also exactly what Manstein needed them to believe. Because the logic assumed that a retreating enemy is a weakening enemy. In Manstein's case, the retreat was not weakness. It was the plan. There is a calculable point in the overextension of an attacking force where its strength becomes its vulnerability, where the distance covered is no longer advantage but exposure. This point is not mystical. It is logistics. Manstein's staff tracked it with the precision of accountants. By mid-February, the indicators converged. Soviet supply columns were being interdicted by Luftflotte 4, Ju-87 Stukas and Hs-129 ground attack aircraft operated on direct radio links with forward German units, striking Soviet tank concentrations, supply convoys, and bridgeheads. Artillery was tied to position. Aircraft were not. A squadron returning from one engagement could be over a different battlefield within hours. The air component functioned as mobile artillery in a war of movement, filling the gap that conventional guns could not cover at the speed the front was shifting. On the ground, a different kind of advantage was compounding. German maintenance crews operated under a 24-hour repair doctrine. Any vehicle disabled by mechanical failure or light combat damage had to be returned to service within a day, or it was treated as a tactical loss and prioritized accordingly. Estimates from divisional records suggest that in any given combat week, 20 to 30% of operational vehicles were repaired vehicles, tanks that, without a functioning maintenance system, would simply not have existed. Meanwhile, Soviet tank units were leaving vehicles at roadsides, not from enemy fire, from broken tracks, overheated engines, empty fuel tanks. A disabled Panzer IV with a broken final drive shaft was back in action in 6 to 8 hours if parts were available and the mechanics knew the procedure. The Soviet equivalent stayed where it stopped. The gap between the two systems was not dramatic in any single instance, but it was cumulative. And by the third week of February, it had become decisive. Manstein's clock was approaching zero. February 19th. The counterstroke begins. Not as a coordinated grand assault across the entire front, not as a single arrow on a map drawn in a headquarters far from the fighting. It begins as a system of thrusts at corps and division level, executed under Auftragstaktik, the command philosophy that defined objectives but left execution to the officers facing the situation. The SS Panzer Corps drives from the south in an arc threatening to envelop the 6th Soviet Army. Individual divisions strike at concentration points aimed at the supply lines of the overextended Soviet formations, and the structural advantage activates. A German battalion commander who identified an opportunity, an exposed flank, an unguarded supply route, a gap between Soviet units, could act immediately, without requesting permission, without waiting for authorization to pass upward through the chain and return. A Soviet battalion commander who recognized the same opportunity had to report upward, wait for approval, then act. In engagements where windows of minutes or seconds determined outcomes, this latency was not a personality flaw. It was a structural disadvantage built into the system itself. The Soviet combat reports from late February read like a clinical catalog of overextension. Units report being under attack while neighboring units are still advancing. Commands request fuel that does not arrive because supply columns have been hit. Tank formations that entered villages without infantry escort lose vehicles to close combat weapons because the infantry never caught up. These are not the symptoms of an army that was defeated. These are the symptoms of an army that overestimated its own strength. On a map table in Manstein's headquarters, a pencil stub rests against the acetate overlay, its tip broken. The line it last traced runs south of Kharkov. The line curves inward. The attacker has become the pursued, and no one on the Soviet side can identify the exact moment it happened. March 7th. Manstein redirects the advance toward Kharkov itself. March 11th. The SS Panzer Corps attacks the city. The assault is not the product of a detailed operational plan issued from Corps headquarters. It is the result of a sequence of decisions made at regimental and battalion level. SS Obergruppenführer Paul Hauser defined the objectives. How those objectives were reached was determined by the men assessing the situation on the ground. This is Auftragstaktik in its purest operational expression. Not theory, application, under fire, against a defending force that still outnumbered the attackers in aggregate, but could no longer concentrate that numerical advantage at any single point. By March 15th, Kharkov is back in German hands. 2 days later, Belgorod falls. The operational reversal is complete. In less than 4 weeks, the front has swung from Soviet pursuit to German counteroffensive. The 6th Soviet Army and the 1st Guards Army, which had entered February believing they were in a war of pursuit, exit March, having suffered an estimated 90,000 casualties. The SS Panzer Corps reports approximately 4,300 killed and wounded through mid-March. The ratio is not the product of superior courage. It is the product of a system: maintenance, communications, tactical delegation, air-ground coordination, and equipment quality, operating under conditions specifically engineered to maximize its advantages. Qualitative superiority in training, command culture, communication, and maintenance produced a multiplier effect that compensated for quantitative inferiority, temporarily, locally. The front line that emerged in spring 1943 contained a new feature: a bulge, a salient. Kursk. The question that remains is not whether Manstein's counterstroke worked. It worked. The operational record is unambiguous. The question is what it proved. Some Soviet divisions that entered the campaign at reduced strength, already worn from months of continuous operations, emerged with 1,000 to 2,000 combat effectives, not because of a single catastrophic engagement, but because the cumulative mechanics of overextension, supply failure, and concentrated counterattack ground them down across weeks. The German system won the engagement. The qualitative edge, in doctrine, in equipment, in the autonomy of junior commanders, functioned exactly as designed under the specific conditions of February and March 1943. But conditions are not permanent. The system that produced the Third Battle of Kharkov required full-strength divisions. It required air superiority, or, at minimum, air parity. It required maintenance infrastructure operating at peak capacity. It required an enemy who had outrun his logistics. Each of those conditions was a diminishing asset. Soviet industrial output was accelerating. Soviet tactical doctrine was adapting. The supply of Tigers and fully equipped SS divisions was finite. The supply of T-34s was not. The qualitative system wins the battle. The quantitative system wins the war. Manstein had demonstrated that the Wehrmacht could still generate decisive local superiority. He had not demonstrated that this capability was renewable. The bulge at Kursk sat in the front line like an invitation. Both sides could see it. Both sides understood what it meant. The Germans saw an opportunity to cut off the salient, to repeat the operational logic that had worked at Kharkov on a larger scale. The Soviets saw a trap, and this time they prepared for it. What Manstein built at Kharkov, the weaponization of retreat, the exploitation of an enemy blinded by his own success, could not be repeated at Kursk, because the Stavka had learned. The overextension that made the counterstroke possible was a mistake the Soviet command would not make in the same way again. Was Kharkov proof that the Wehrmacht could still have won the war? Or was it the last time the system could demonstrate its own superiority clearly enough to sustain the illusion? The answer does not lie in Kharkov. It lies in what came after. And what came after was a salient, a summer, and an enemy who had stopped running into traps and started building them.